Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for 7 sketchy things about Sagittarius. And this is a bit of full disclosure, is that what we call it? I am a Sun in Sagittarius and I have Mercury in Sagittarius. So I was able to come up with 6 things and I had to look online for the 7th because sometimes some of the traits, and this is true of all the signs, they kind of overlap. You know, one aspect of it can be, combined with another. So I wanted to get something completely different so that I'm not repeating myself. And I think I have done so to some degree. So number 1, being hypocritical and preachy. I put those two together because we could say sanctimonious, which means that a person is on a high horse and, telling other people what they should do with their lives. That is certainly true of Sagittarius. At least I can admit to that one. But it doesn't mean that a Sagittarian is going to just do this at every turn. They may do it only with people close to them. Sagittarius is the ruler of the 9th house, which deals with wisdom, and hence Sage, Sadge. And the 9th house deals with higher education, but also religious constructs. So when somebody is preachy, it's like they're being a preacher, and that is why they're doing what they're doing. But do they practice what they preach is the real question. And because Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, it's a planet of excess. So oftentimes I think that Sagittarians, they, tell other people what to do, and they don't always live up to it themselves, but they want to live up to it. And so they can fall into this place where they're speaking truth, but they're just not walking the talk, okay? And that's not the worst thing in the world of simply telling other people things that are part of a good way of living. However, the sanctimonious part is the problem when the Sagittarian kind of judges the fallen soul, if you will, for not being what it's supposed to be. And it's not that Sagittarius is judgmental in a mean way. It's just that kind of arrogance. And that actually gets to the second point, or number 2, which is arrogance, being full of themselves. And this is kind of an interesting one because Sagittarius is a fire sign and Aries and Leo are the other 2 fire signs. And when you hear those 2 signs being spoken about, ego is something that I think a lot of people immediately think of when they think of an Aries person or they think of a Leo person. So fire sign energy is naturally egoic, but it doesn't have to be egotistical in the sense of being narcissistic if the person is simply coming from a position of creative self-expression. And self-expression is not just drawing a picture or singing a song. It's also being who you are. Fire signs oftentimes are colorful personalities. And so that's wonderful. But when it goes overboard, they can become very self-absorbed. And that leads to trying to maybe gain, being in a position of having all the attention, an attention seeker. I don't think that Sagittarius is as much doing this as Leo, for example, but still, other people can be put off by a Sagittarian's demeanor and think of them as arrogant because of this. Maybe you call it natural confidence, knowing who they are. There's a natural assertiveness or even aggressiveness that they possess. And this is just part of the fire sign energy. But sometimes it can be taken a little bit too far, and that's when it becomes arrogance. If you're a Sagittarian, it's important to not get carried away and not try to promote yourself in a way that is overbearing. You want to always be interested in what other people have to say, their need for self-expression as well, and not try to hog conversations, not try to hog the spotlight. And I think it's a matter of self-awareness. Number 3, they exaggerate. And I love this example because it always stuck with me when I was going into junior high school. And that's 7th grade in America, 7th and 8th grades, specifically in my case. And so I was about 12 years old. I have a brother who's a couple years younger than I am, a Taurus, so much more earthy and, no nonsense, I guess you would call it. And so I was at a different school now, and I said to him, we have this bookstore, at the school, and you can buy all these things. You can buy a notebook, you can buy erasers, you can buy these cool pencils or whatever I said. And I really did think it was neat that I could buy these things at school because we didn't have a store in elementary school. And when he got to junior high school a couple of years later, by that time I was off in high school, he was like, "That isn't a store. It's just, it was like a hole in the wall. I mean, it was just like a counter. And they had a little thing back there, but to me it was really exciting. But did I exaggerate? Maybe. Maybe I wanted to make it seem like I was in a better place, So exaggeration comes from sometimes the ego, wanting to seem special, wanting to be better. Sagittarians are known as being honest, but when you exaggerate, you're kind of stretching the truth. And other people will catch on to that if the person does it repeatedly. So it is important to be very, accurate when you are talking about something so that it doesn't distort the thing you're talking about. Number 4, commitment. Afraid of commitment. I was looking at the word commitment, but it's actually fear of commitment. And why is this? Why is a Sagittarian afraid of commitment? Well, Sagittarians are fire signs. Fire signs love freedom. Air signs love freedom too. But as soon as I was thinking of freedom, what flashed in my mind was a wild horse. And Sagittarians are connected to the image of the horse. And this idea of galloping in new directions. If you have a spouse and children, how much galloping can you do? Well, maybe you can do it with them, and you can just travel a lot. I watch those shows where the people are living in tiny homes that they take with them or RVs, and it's really thrilling to me. And some of them raise families. Who knows? Maybe they have a strong Sagittarian streak in them. But commitment to Sagittarians sometimes means, prison, a prison term. Because they feel like if they commit to something, that means that they will be obligated to be there no matter what. And if they change their mind, and being a mutable sign, they're perfectly capable of doing that. They're still be on the hook for whatever it is, whether it's having a 12-month lease on an apartment, whether it's having a ring on their finger. Anything that involves contracts will usually make Sagittarians break out in a cold sweat. And, when I think about this one, I think about the fact I haven't had a rental lease probably in 15 or 20 years. And that actually makes me stay longer. I haven't ever been married, but I've been with somebody for decades because that makes me stay longer. It's not about the document. It's about the mentality. So maybe if you are a Sagittarian and you are like that and you are afraid of commitment, maybe you can tweak these things to suit your mentality. In other words, maybe you can work around it so that you can be that person that others can rely on. Or, in this particular case, when we're talking about commitment in relationships, I really do believe that there are no guarantees in life. And I don't think that it's fair or even wise to sign a contract related to relationships. Because to me, contracts and love don't go together. That's for business. And even for business, what if we decide to part ways? I think there should be a lot more freedom built into our lives. But having said that, the Sagittarian doesn't want to go too much in the other extreme where they never really get close to somebody because they fear that commitment, even if it's not in terms of marriage, but just in terms of monogamy or something like that. A Sagittarian may feel that that's too confining, and they may be exaggerating the problem because they are very self-centered or very irresponsible, because I'm going to talk about irresponsibility too. So if you're with somebody who's a Sagittarian and they keep putting off marriage, understand that, and maybe they've promised it, so that could be them exaggerating and not necessarily meaning what they say 100%. You better decide for yourself how long you're going to stay there. But I will say, and it's funny because I'm kind of being lenient on Sagittarians, I guess, by saying this. I will say for people that are in that position, that they're waiting to marry somebody who is a Sagittarian, is that ask yourself, why is it so important that you have this document? Because you could push away a good person simply because you have it in your mind that this is the only legitimate proof of a relationship. And I realize that people get married for moral reasons, and I want to acknowledge that. I do respect that. But even for moral reasons, if you think about it, signing a document that says that you will love somebody forever or you won't cheat on them doesn't prevent it from happening. And I think there's a little bit too much magical thinking, fairy dust sprinkled on this concept where people think that if they get married, they're going to have this, monogamous, lifelong partnership, which couldn't be further from the truth, unfortunately, in 2018, as I record this. So think about that. And I actually one time was having a discussion with a woman. She was a stranger. I was in a laundromat, and this was probably about 25 years ago. And she was saying, asking me, do you have a partner, blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, And at that time, I had been with my partner, gosh, it was only 9 years. I can't believe it was that. No, it was like 11 years at that point. 11 years. And she was like, when she found out that we weren't married and we were living together, we weren't married. And she was like, but what about if he leaves you? And I think I burst into laughter because it's like she really believed that if you get married to somebody, they're not going to leave you. I couldn't believe this. This was a grown woman. So people do think like that. And they're fear-based about this idea of not having a contract. And so I feel that it's very important for me to say this because you may be in love with somebody who's a great person and they're a Sagittarian, but that's the one thing that is kind of like a sticking point with you. And that's why I want to, kind of bring it back into reality, because that may not be the end of the world, and you may let go of somebody who is actually a very good person. Number 5, too blunt, puts foot in mouth. Well, that's certainly true of Sagittarians, and then they can make it worse with the apology. Why does this happen? Well, all fire signs, especially I think Aries and Sagittarius, are very spontaneous, and they run their mouths. Well, Sagittarians run their mouths for sure. And sometimes when you talk and you're not thinking, you say something a little bit too honest, because that's what bluntness is. That's honesty. A child is blunt. A child gets to the point because a child doesn't know about protecting the fragile ego. So children will just say whatever comes to the top of their minds. Well, as adults, we're not supposed to be like children. We're supposed to have a little bit of understanding of human nature and a little bit of sensitivity. And Sagittarians, sometimes, that's another one I could have put as being insensitive. I think that fire signs tend to be insensitive. Even though they're very passionate, emotional themselves, it's not in a personal way that they're emotional. So they tend to kind of act very straightforwardly, and other people can find that off-putting. I have had to learn this the hard way, because it's not that I offended a whole bunch of people, but I realize now that communication is something that is an art form. And I think like a Libran person, I was ragging on them when I did their 7 sketchy things, but Librans really do have that diplomacy that Sagittarians could learn a few tricks about. And so diplomacy involves stating what you need to state, but doing so in a way that doesn't offend somebody. And it's not that I'm 100% that in that way. Sometimes I am very blunt still. And I do that now more consciously, when I consciously feel like it's important to be straightforward, like to the point. But if I have to say something, I do try to kind of gussy it up with a lot of, either you compliment somebody first before you criticize, and you try to be very understanding of how this may be taken and things. That's the most important aspect of it. If you are dealing with a Sagittarian who does this, understand that it's not malicious. I think that's the biggest thing. Some people are so hypersensitive, Cancer, that they can, crawl into their shell and feel that they've been totally dissed when it wasn't meant in a malicious way whatsoever. Number 6, irresponsible. And this goes back to fear of commitment. And I could have put also doesn't pay attention to the little details. And this is true of all fire signs, with that enthusiasm and that kind of impetuous, or what's the other word? Just rash way of approaching life. Sometimes it's slapdash, and people are not putting attention to things. And that's a form of being irresponsible. You have to really look at the details. You have to really, when you say you're going to do something, you have to do it. And if there's some reason you can't do it, you should tell the person that you promised ahead of time. So instead of just like, if you tell somebody, I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock, and you get caught up in something else, and then you just like go off on another tangent and don't even call that person. Sometimes the Sagittarian might just get caught up in something else. It's like ADD, and they don't even remember that they promised. someone. That's also another thing that might be associated with exaggeration, overpromising. So that's what I mean when some of these things overlap. And so the irresponsibility comes in when the person is overpromising, exaggerating what they can accomplish within a certain amount of time, and then they don't deliver. And so for a Sagittarian, try to be a little bit more, take things piece by piece so that you're not being too optimistic. That's another thing, overly optimistic, which I mean, can anybody really be overly optimistic? Well, if they promise another person something that can't be delivered at the time that they say it's going to be, then yeah. So all of these things are connected, and learning how to be accountable for your actions. So this can be anybody at any age. A Sagittarian, oftentimes, at least in my experience, can come across as an overgrown child. All the fire signs can. And I think that's unfortunate in the sense that being spontaneous and being in touch with your inner child are not bad things. However, because of this tendency, Sagittarians may give off a vibe of not being a responsible person. So if a Sagittarian is working in an office, they may get passed over for promotions and other opportunities because the boss may view them as kind of sketchy, talking about it from a irresponsible point of view, where they don't feel like they can trust this person to really deliver what they promise, to really deliver their, whatever their project is on time. And so and especially if they have let people down in the past, it's very hard for the Sagittarian to gain the trust of others when it comes to accomplishing their projects at the deadline or what have you. And so that can actually cost them if they're in the workplace. And this is one of the reasons why a Sagittarian, as well as other fire signs, may do better working for themselves, where they can have their own timeline and they don't have to promise anything to anybody. And you always have a customer or a client, but then you can tweak it. You can tell them, well, I'm going to have to do this tomorrow or next week. Number 7, argumentative. This was the one I looked up online. I'm surprised I didn't think of it on my own. Because I have Mercury in Sagittarius as well as the Sun, this certainly applies to me. And that's one of the reasons why I kept this open and didn't say 7 sketchy things about Sagittarius Sun. And I meant it to be some of the personal planets or the moon or even the rising sign. And Sagittarius is associated with that with that 9th house. It rules that 9th house. Now, it's interesting. I still have to get straight about what the legal profession has to do with the 9th house. Something about the 9th house has to do with law. But I've also heard the 7th house. And I think that the laws themselves would fall into the 9th house because they're kind of like a set of beliefs as well. Just like religious beliefs, the dogma of religion. So a Sagittarian would make a very good lawyer because they do have a tendency to argue, to love to argue about social issues, any kind of issue. Some are conservative and some are liberal. It's not that one is over another. I think William F. Buckley was a Sagittarian. Well, now I just say I think because somebody corrected me about Steve Jobs. I thought he was a Scorpio, and I guess it turned out he was a Pisces. So that kind of argumentative nature may be influenced by law, however it fits into that ninth house. And I think Sagittarians love a good debate, and I think they're very good at debating. You can say whatever you want about Ann Coulter. She's a Sagittarian. I didn't know this until a couple of years ago. I was like blown away. You can say whatever you want about her, but she is a master debater. and I'm actually serious about that. She's very good at debating. One thing she does is she doesn't get excited when, angry when she's, stating her case and when the other person their head is exploding. And she's a very controversial figure. So that kind of skill with words is also one of the reasons why Sagittarius and the ninth house are connected to higher learning and being a professor. But that sense of let's have this heated discussion, which is what being argumentative is, and we're going to come at it from our own personal philosophies. And there's something very appealing about that to me, but that can be taken to the extreme, obviously. If you're doing it about every little thing, that can really get on other people's nerves. And if you're connected to somebody who's a Sagittarian who's doing this, again, just like some of these other points, don't take it personally or think that, they're being malicious because they're not. But it still can be irritating when people want just to have a nice, pleasant evening and not have these heated debates. I can totally understand that, but it's so irresistible to me. To me, it makes life more colorful, and yet to other people, it's unnerving and, disturbing the peace. And sometimes people don't want to get into their opinions. I would say along these lines, being too opinionated. I think that's definitely something that Sagittarians can be guilty of. So anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed this, and I do this kind of analysis in my personal readings, astrological versions at least. Well, maybe even the tarot in my own way. I have a moon in Virgo, so that probably is why I get into the details. So the link to my website is below. Take care. Bye.